My question is based more on the technical side of your work, as well as a number of other scientists whom I have followed who talk about the universe being made up of a binary code, basically. And you may have addressed this question in a different way or form in one of your past videos, but I have either not understood your responses to it or didn't get the complete answer. But I've heard you refer to the universe as being the computer, basically. But wouldn't it make more sense that the universe would be the illusion that the ones and zeros make up through consciousness, and consciousness being kind of the software within the computer? And wouldn't the evidence that you have provided, as well as other scientists, basically prove that we are in fact in some kind of a computer, maybe not a computer that we would be familiar with, but a hardware-like computer, which we would be, whether the software within it or some type of operating system of some kind?
I can see that people would come to that conclusion because they think of consciousness as software, decision, choices, if then kind of things, right? It's they think of it that way. And that software needs hardware to run in. But that's not really the way consciousness works. Consciousness is the computer. Consciousness, let's put it this way, consciousness is defined as awareness with a choice. So I define it. Okay. Consciousness is an information system. Awareness is an information system. Awareness says, aware of what? Well, what it's aware of is its input. That's the input data. Okay. Now we here sitting in this virtual reality, we're aware of what we get from 5 senses. We get data from 5 senses. We collect that data from the 5 senses and we process it. And after we process it, we make choices based on it. Okay, so that's what consciousness does. Awareness with a choice. Awareness takes in the data. The consciousness also, without awareness, has to have memory. Otherwise, whatever it sees is the first thing it sees. If it has no memory, it only sees first things and then the next first thing it sees. So it has to have memory. It has to have processing, because then it looks at those things, the data that it gets, its input data, and it says, well, how did this change compared to the last input data I get? And what does it mean? What's the significance of the change in the data? Then it makes choices. For choices, it has to have a purpose. Someplace it's going, someplace it's working toward. And it looks at its data and says, oh, in order to further my purpose, I will make this choice rather than that choice. So what I'm describing is an information system. Has input, has memory, has processing, has output. Outputs its action, its choice. Okay, so that describes an information system. Now, think of an information system where all the bits are random. Well, there's no information in an information system. All the bits are random. Randomness describes no information. Okay, so ordering those bits creates information. That ordered bit of bits can mean something. You can give it a symbol for something. It has value. Okay, so you can order your bits. When you order the bits, you lower entropy. That's the nature of entropy. If you order things, you lower entropy. If you scatter things and disorder things, you have higher entropy. So this computer called consciousness, this information system called consciousness, has a function, has a purpose, and that is to create information that's useful, that has meaning and significance to itself. So it does that. It tries to make choices that makes more meaning, more better information. So it can make a pattern of patterns, whatever it can do, sequences. It can learn about arithmetic and addition and subtraction and algebra. It can, that's the logic of quantity. It can study the logic of quantity. So it does all this, and that is consciousness. It's consciousness that is the system. Consciousness is the information system, is the computer. Okay, now that's one monolithic thing. You know, if we talk computer talk, it's a virtual machine. So you make a virtual machine, you give it a little processing, you give it some memory, you give it, you know, all the things it needs. Now it can make choices inside. Well, that virtual thing, that's the consciousness that's me and you and all the people that are here. I call those individuated units of consciousness, virtual machines within a bigger machine. Okay, so we are really all one. We're all pieces of this consciousness. Now, consciousness has no space. It's all thought. It's all mind. It's just mental. So it started as that one small piece of consciousness that only knew that it could be in state 1 or state 0. Had 2 states it could be in. That's all. It was aware that it existed. It knew that it was it, had self-awareness, and it knew that it was there was other outside of it. So it's aware of that. That's its awareness, and it has a choice. It orders things for its choice. That becomes information. It orders more. It finds out that it can be a 1 or a 0, but now in its memory, it could be a 1 and a 0, and now a 0 and a 1, and then a 1 and a 1. And it gives meaning to those things. It orders those things. It grows up. Its memory gets better and better and bigger and bigger, and it has more 1s and 0s that it can remember. Okay, now that's one way of looking at it. And when you look at it that way, you end up with this computer that is just one mind that's broken itself up into subpieces of that mind. There's no space in it. It's just mind. Now, there's the other way to look at it that says, all right, just like physical cells, you started out with one cell, but eventually that single cell learned how to divide itself, and now you had 2 cells, and they learned how to divide itself. Now you have 4 cells. So you went from single cell thing like amoebas to multi-celled things like jellyfish. Well, as you get multi-cell things, the cells have to cooperate. That lowers the entropy. So they cooperate with each other, they make bigger and bigger things, and so it goes up until you got a human being with 4 trillion cells, all cooperating to make one system. So now you say you've got this smallest piece of consciousness, which is just a cell that has awareness and makes a choice. The only choice is between a 1 and a 0. It's a little binary piece of consciousness. The smallest piece of consciousness is a consciousness cell, if you like. And now it figures out how to duplicate itself. It makes 2 of itself in the same way that cells duplicate. A little bit of everything gets shared, gets moved, barrier gets between them. Now you got 2 of them. Then you got 4 of them. Now you got more of them. Now in this group, instead of one big mind that has everything in terms of its memory, now you have a mind made up of millions and trillions and quadrillions of little pieces of mind, which all go together to share and work together to form one entity, just like all the 4 trillion cells in my body go together to form one entity with a purpose. And that purpose is always to lower entropy. You see, now, so I just gave you 2 different ways of it. One of them is the cellular method, ends up in a consciousness being a very large number of small cells all cooperating and working together like a human, follows biology through cell splitting. And the other one is just one that just grew and evolved its capacity to where it's just one mind that's not made up of a lot of things. These are 2 different paths that you can take. They both have some credibility, you know, and people refer to both of them. Either way, that you can see how this mind may have evolved. So now the computer itself, this information system, can configure itself to be like a computer. It can compute. It's full of 1s and 0s. It can compute whether it's remembering them or putting them all together in memory, or whether it's got little pieces of 1s and 0s that it can configure, doesn't matter. But it can configure a piece of itself as a computer. It can configure a piece of itself as a virtual machine. And when those virtual machines are not making good choices because all they can do is communicate to other virtual machines and to the system. It can create a virtual reality that defines experience in a virtual reality so that these pieces of consciousness can log on, play those avatars. I'm jumping all kinds of steps here, play those avatars, and can then evolve through its choices because the little pieces of consciousness evolve by the quality of the choices they make. Do those choices lower entropy or raise entropy? And when it's a social system, you find out that lowering entropy means working together and cooperating, caring about each other. And high entropy means fearful, not trusting, not sharing, grabby, it's all about me kind of thing. So, anyway, that's kind of my model. And it turns out that consciousness is the computer. It can configure itself, it's an information system. So there's no need to separate it and say, oh, we're the software inside some kind of hardware, because now you have to say, well, what's that hardware and where does it come from and who built it and where does, and you're stuck with these things that don't have any answers. Whereas now you got all the answers, everything's answered. It pulls the whole system out. You've got the whole complete thing, and it makes perfect sense. This is a virtual reality.
You
This
consider it an
virtual,
organic entity, this consciousness? Would you consider it organic, depending on how you define that, of course?
sure, it's one thing. Am I an organic entity in my avatar? 4 trillion cells all cooperating to work together? Yeah, that's an organic thing. It's all that cooperation. If I was just a big amoeba, if I was just kept getting smarter and smarter and smarter and didn't need a lot of piece parts, well, that doesn't work in a physical world very well. But in a mental world, you can imagine that just gets wiser and wiser and grows because it can imagine all the ones and zeros it needs to learn math and do other kinds of things. So you can look at it either way, whether you get one mind that contains everything, or whether you have that mind made up of zillions of smaller cells, like a human being's made up of zillions of smaller cells that all cooperate. Doesn't really matter. See, that's just structural stuff that it could be this way, it could be that way. Who cares? Let's move on. It's not critical to the outcome of anything. So what happens is these things, these virtual machines communicate with each other. Nice. They get to make choices, but the choices don't have a whole lot of significance to them. They're just in a big chat room. So what do we need? We need a better virtual reality. The first virtual reality is just communication protocols. A virtual reality is that you make rules and everybody that signs on has to follow the rules. Well, that's communication protocols. Now we all can talk to each other. Great. Well, let's all learn to grow up and become love talking to each other. It's a slow process. So let's put another virtual reality together that's more challenging. Start with a set of initial conditions. Start with a rule set. Punch the run button. Let the initial conditions change according to the rule set. Called a big digital bang. And you let that big digital bang just evolve out through whatever you want. In the beginning, you run it real fast because there's nothing going on there much but probabilities. And then you slow it down as it gets out there. And you end up with a universe that's stable. Along the way, you have to, it's a cut trial and error. You have to stop and say, okay, this thing just fell apart. It all came in and squished. Gravity was too much. Let's decrease gravity. Let's increase something else. That's why you end up with these 5 constants that are all tuned to each other, to 10 decimal places that are very important for the universe to be stable. How did they get that way? How does random process have 5 cosmic constants all tuned to 10 decimal places with each other? Well, it's impossible to have that happen in a random process. There is no random process here. It was a trial and error process of creating a virtual reality. Okay. So it answers all the questions. It explains every paranormal thing, exactly why it happens and what the structure is. It explains everything. It explains, like I say, all the paranormal things. It explains physics. It explains quantum physics. It explains why quantum physics works the way it does. It explains why C is a constant. It explains, I think, close to like 40 of these scientific paradoxes. So everything falls out with a very simple explanation. That's the whole thing. So when you look at it like that, that's a much more successful model because the other models can't explain everything. The other models just kind of give a very high end, this is kind of the way we are, but they can't explain why quantum physics acts the way it does. They can't explain why C is a constant. They can't explain why C sometimes changes in the 8th decimal place. A little bit, not much, just in the 8th decimal place. And we know it's real change because we can measure it to 15 decimal places. So it's only up here in the 8th decimal place it changes a little bit. Why does that happen? Well, this explains that. It explains all of these paradoxes. Matter of fact, there isn't a single paradox left in physics that it doesn't explain. So that's the model, and that's why I have it the way it is. Consciousness is the computer. We are pieces of that, and we are playing a character in a virtual reality created by consciousness, evolved by consciousness, not programmed by consciousness, but evolved by consciousness, because in this virtual reality, there's a real tight rule set that says how everything can interact with everything else. And that means you have lots of feedback, lots of interaction. Everything that I do affects people around me. You know, if I marry Sally instead of Sue, it changes not only Sally and Sue and my idea, but Sally's parents and Susie's parents and her old boyfriend. And, you know, everybody does things that interact with everybody else. So you have this mush of interactions that create life and death and wonderful and bad things that people then have to deal with. So it's not just a chat room anymore. This is real meaningful choices that a consciousness, a virtual machine, an individuated unit of consciousness like me gets in there. Now I have to make moral choices, ethical choices, choices that affect people. I'm not a lone person on an island anymore. I'm in a sea of humanity, and I'm a part of it, and it's a part of me. So now my evolution is a lot faster because I've got consequential choices, not just chit chat. So that's why the virtual reality had to be made. The whole system works on the process of lowering entropy. That's the key.
Could I just get a last yes or no answer from you
Sure.
as to would you consider this consciousness a type of artificial intelligence?
Yes, in the books, you'll find a discussion of that very thing. And basically, all of that can't be anything more than conjecture. So I get a little silly with it and have fun. And I say, maybe this whole thing is just a shell in another bigger thing. You know, that could be. But all we're doing is waving our hands and making things up. All we really know for sure is it is.
Got it.
We can't get outside of it because we're it.